300 feet down, a 40-ton animal stops swimming and starts singing. He hangs almost motionless in the water column, head tilted slightly down, and holds a single note for nearly 30 seconds before sliding into the next phrase. He will not surface to breathe for another 20 minutes. The song runs 11 minutes without repeating, then starts over, note for note, exactly the same. He will do this for 6 hours straight. Off the coast of Australia that same winter, more than 1,000 miles away, a different male is singing almost the identical song, phrase for phrase. Neither whale has ever met the other. Neither has ever shared a feeding ground, a migration route, or a single day of contact. You would expect two males singing to females an ocean apart to sound nothing alike.
Instead, entire populations of humpback whales change their song together, on the same schedule, the same winter. Like a hit single moving through a fan base that has never held a rehearsal and has no idea a new single has even dropped. Today, we are going to find out how a song invented by one whale in one ocean basin can end up in the throats of thousands of whales who never heard the original singer, and why scientists spent 40 years arguing about who exactly the song is even for. Humpback whales spend their summers in cold, food-rich water near the poles, lunging through bait balls of herring and krill, packing on blubber that has to carry them through the year without another meal. They do not sing there. Feeding grounds are loud with the business of survival, not courtship, and stomachs are full.
Come autumn, entire populations migrate thousands of miles toward warm, low-latitude breeding grounds. The reefs off Hawaii, the coastal shallows of eastern Australia, the waters around Tonga and French Polynesia. It is only here, months after leaving the feeding grounds, that adult males stop eating almost entirely and start to sing. A single population sings one song, and only one. Every male within it sings the same sequence of sounds, in the same order, and it is never the song from the year before. The song itself is not noise strung together at random. Roger Payne and Scott McVeigh, working through recordings gathered partly from U.S. Navy hydrophone arrays built to track submarines, discovered in 1971 that these vocalizations follow a strict internal architecture. Individual sound units link into phrases. Phrases repeat to build themes, and themes are strung together in a fixed order to form one complete song lasting anywhere from 6 to 30 minutes.
A male sings that exact sequence, loops back to the first phrase, and sings it again. For hours, sometimes for an entire day, surfacing only briefly to breathe between verses before diving back down to resume exactly where he left off. Payne and McVeigh's paper turned a folk curiosity fishermen had noted for decades into a subject of serious science. A decade later, one of their recordings was pressed onto copper and gold-plated disc and bolted to the side of the Voyager spacecraft, now more than 15 billion miles from Earth, carrying a hydrophone recording of a humpback whale past the edge of the solar system. Long before any of this had a name, the song already had listeners who mistook it for something else entirely. Sailors on wooden whaling ships in the 19th century reported eerie moans and groans traveling up through a vessel's hull, sounds with no obvious source, logged in journals as ghost stories more than natural history. A century later, during the Cold War, U.S. Navy sonar operators scanning for Soviet submarines along fixed hydrophone arrays kept picking up long, structured tonal sounds that did not match any engine signature on file. For years, those recordings sat classified, filed away as an unsolved acoustic mystery of the deep Atlantic and Pacific, logged and set aside rather than explained. It was only once portions of that archive were declassified and handed to researchers that Roger Payne and Scott McVeigh got the raw material that let them prove, in 1971, that the ghost in the hydrophones was a humpback whale, repeating itself, on purpose, in a fixed pattern any musician would recognize as a composed piece rather than noise. Here is the first complication. A song this rigid in structure should be stable, a fixed signal, evolved once and kept, the way a species' typical bird call stays recognizable across a lifetime. It is not.
Katie Payne, working through hours of tape from the same population across consecutive years, found the opposite. Every year, the song had changed from the year before. Not slightly, rearranged, with old phrases dropped entirely, new phrases inserted, whole themes swapped for ones that had never appeared in that population's recordings. And every male in the population made the same changes in the same season at roughly the same time. A whale who left on migration singing one version returned the following winter already singing the new one. There is no lead singer standing at the front of a pod, no rehearsal, no way for any individual whale to broadcast the update to the rest before the season starts. The entire population simply arrives already synchronized. That alone unsettled the assumption that whale song was fixed by biology. Then, in 1996, researchers monitoring the humpback population off the eastern coast of Australia caught something that broke the pattern completely.
Marine bioacoustics researcher Michael Node and colleagues had been recording that population's song for years, watching it drift gradually, phrase by phrase, the way it always had. Then, within the span of a single breeding season, the entire population abandoned its song and began singing something almost unrecognizable, a wholesale replacement, not a gradual drift. Node's team traced the source. A handful of male humpbacks from the population off Australia's west coast. A separate group with an entirely different song had turned up on the east coast that year, likely stragglers off course during migration. Within 2 years, the west coast song had completely displaced the east coast population's own song. Every male on the east coast was now singing a tune that, 2 years earlier, had belonged exclusively to whales on the opposite side of the continent. It remains one of the fastest cultural replacement events ever documented in a wild population, of any species. The scale of what NOAD's team witnessed only became clear once they checked the numbers. The population off Australia's east coast at the time numbered in the low thousands. A wholesale changeover in a group that size, completed within 2 breeding seasons, driven by what may have been as few as a handful of stray singers, meant that cultural influence in this species has almost nothing to do with numerical majority. A tiny minority, in the right place at the right point in the migration, can overwrite the preferences of thousands, provided their song is the one being heard when the population is primed to listen. NOAD's discovery raised an obvious next question. If one small group of stray singers could overwrite an entire population's song in 2 years, how far could a single new song actually travel? And how many populations would it pass through before it faded out?
The answer took a coordinated, multi-year listening effort across 6 humpback populations, spread over roughly 4,000 miles of the South Pacific, led by bioacoustics researcher Ellen Garland, and published in 2011. Her team combed through recordings collected from eastern Australia through New Caledonia, Fiji, Tonga, and out to French Polynesia, comparing song structure population by population, year by year. What emerged was a wave. A new song first appeared in the Australian population. The following year, that same song showed up more than 1,000 miles east in New Caledonia, while Australia had already moved on to something newer still. A year after that, the song reached Tonga. Then it reached French Polynesia, arriving there 2 full years and roughly 4,000 miles after it was first recorded off Australia.
Garland's team documented this same west-to-east relay repeating multiple times across nearly a decade of recordings. Songs consistently moving in one direction, population handing off to population, in sequence, like a wave crossing open water, never once observed reversing east to west. Here is where the ocean should have stopped the signal outright. These are not neighboring pods that cross paths on an ordinary Tuesday. Australia and French Polynesia are separated by thousands of miles of open water and, for most of the year, by breeding grounds that never overlap. Garland's leading explanation is that transmission happens during migration, at the narrow edges where adjacent populations' ranges briefly brush against each other, or where an individual male occasionally strays into a neighboring population's waters and finds himself, for a season, surrounded by singers performing something he has never heard before. A stray male exposed to an unfamiliar song does not resist it or ignore it. He appears to adopt it, carry it home across thousands of miles of open ocean, and by the following season, his entire population is singing a variant of what he brought back. One whale, with no intention of starting anything, acting as the unwitting courier for a cultural revolution that outlives his own involvement in it. This is where the story runs into its most uncomfortable, least settled question. If singing exists to attract a mate, why replace a functional, presumably effective song with an unfamiliar one from a population an ocean away, instead of simply refining the version that already works? Many people assume whale song functions the way a peacock's tail does, a display shaped by female choice, where the most elaborate or attractive singer wins the most mating opportunities, and constant change is just males one-upping each other's charm. That is not what the data actually shows. Researchers who have spent seasons tracking female behavior around singing males report almost no evidence that females are drawn toward a singer at all. Females rarely, if ever, approach one. Some studies instead suggest singing may function less as a broadcast aimed at females and more as a signal exchanged between males, a way to advertise presence, hold space from rivals, or, in some recorded cases, apparently draw other males closer to a singer rather than warn them off, the way one broadcast can coordinate a loosely organized crowd of competitors rather than court a single listener. Nobody has definitively closed the question of exactly who the song is for, or why. What the evidence has settled is narrower and just as strange on its own. Whatever purpose the song ultimately serves, its content is not fixed by instinct. It is learned, copied, and overwritten, generation after generation. The closest thing to a documented cultural fashion outside of humans.
There is a second common assumption worth breaking here, one separate from the question of who the song is for. Many people picture a single, universal whale song, as if every humpback on Earth were performing the same ancient melody handed down since the species evolved. That is not what the ocean actually contains. Humpback populations in the North Atlantic sing a song structurally unrelated to anything recorded across the South Pacific, built from different phrase types entirely, evolving on its own separate multi-year track. The two ocean basins do not exchange songs because the whales themselves almost never do. What looks, from a distance, like one grand planetary song turns out to be several independent regional traditions, each drifting and revolving on its own timeline, each capable of a NOAD-style overnight replacement only within its own basin, never across it. Culture here has borders, and the border is simply how far a whale can plausibly swim in a season.
Consider what that actually requires, mechanically, of an animal with no hands and no written notation. A male has to hear a version of the song he has never encountered, hold enough of its structure in memory to reproduce it accurately weeks or months later, and then perform it precisely enough that other males recognize it as the current version rather than a mistake worth ignoring. Humpback whale brains carry an unusually well-developed set of structures associated with social processing, developed to a degree comparable, relative to brain size, with structures found in some primates. That capacity for social learning, layered onto a vocal tract capable of holding a single controlled tone for tens of seconds at a stretch, while several atmospheres of water pressure sit on the chest, is what makes the whole system mechanically possible in the first place. None of it works the way a bird's alarm call works, fixed and inherited.
It moves the way a song moves through a human radio audience, copied, not born, generation after generation. One anatomical detail explains why a single male can sustain a performance like this at all. Humpback whales have no vocal cords exposed to open air the way land mammals do, and a singing whale releases no bubbles, no exhaled air lost to the water column. Sound is produced by recycling a fixed volume of air back and forth through an internal laryngeal sac positioned beneath the blowhole, a structure that lets the same breath be reused to generate tone after tone without venting it to the surface. That single mechanical trick is what allows a male to hold one continuous song for the better part of an hour on one held breath, then surface only briefly, refill, and dive straight back into the exact phrase where he left off.
Without that internal air recycling system, a performance of this length and precision would be physically impossible on the lung capacity available even to an animal this size. The scale involved is what keeps researchers careful about calling this anything less than extraordinary. Sound in seawater travels roughly 4 times faster than sound in air, and low-frequency whale song, under the right conditions, can propagate for hundreds of miles through the deep sound channel, a layer of ocean where pressure and temperature bend sound waves so they travel with minimal loss over enormous distances. A song sung off one reef can, in principle, reach a whale many miles away long before that whale ever makes physical contact with the population singing it. Layer that acoustic reach on top of years of migratory overlap at the fraying edges of breeding ranges, and a single new song can, across enough seasons, walk itself across an entire ocean basin. Not by any one whale swimming the whole 4,000 miles, but by handoff after handoff, population to population, the way a rumor crosses a continent, one conversation at a time, arriving changed at every stop. By the final months of any given breeding season, the population that started the wave has usually already moved on again, layering in new phrases, drifting the song further from where it began, while the population 2 hops behind is only now catching up to the version that was current 2 years earlier. The song is never finished. It is mid-transmission, permanently, an unbroken relay with no single point in the whole ocean where anyone could reasonably say, "This is the song, unchanged, as it has always been sung." What the whales leave behind, season after season, is not a fixed anthem passed down like a species call, inherited whole and stable across generations. It is closer to a moving target that an entire ocean basin somehow agrees to chase together, without agreement ever actually being reached by anyone in particular, without a single whale who could be credited as its author for longer than a season or two before the next revision arrives from somewhere further west. No individual male ever hears the whole journey his own song takes after he stops singing it. He moves on to the next version, the way every whale before him did, and the version he abandoned keeps traveling without him, showing up in a population he will never visit, sung by whales who will never know his name existed, if whales can be said to have names at all. A whale off the coast of Australia can, without knowing it and without meaning to, be responsible for what a whale off Tahiti is singing 2 winters later. Proof that culture, in the strict sense of information passed by learning rather than by genes, does not require language, hands, or a shared shoreline. It requires only enough memory, enough hearing, and enough time spent in open water for one voice, eventually, to become everyone's. Every breeding season since Garland's team first mapped the relay, the same west-to-east pattern has shown up again in the recordings. One population's discarded song becoming another population's brand new one, on schedule, without fail. Somewhere in the South Pacific tonight, that relay is still running. One more handoff already underway. One more population about to wake up singing something they did not have last year. Headed east, the way it always goes.